Loud. All right, thanks again, everyone, and welcome to our next installment of our Dishes CQM series. In today's session, we're going to be talking about advising providers on CQM performance measurement. As we just noted, this is a presentation that's geared toward administrative agencies and the work that you do as leaders of your network in your region. And for those of you who are part of a subrecipient direct provider agency and you stay on the line, you're welcome to join us. And we'll just stick you with the administrative agency that is your leader in your region. I will be handling this presentation solo today. So we're missing Jamie, but at the same time, we're going to still maximize the opportunities for participation and to hear your voices as a part of this. Julie, I don't know if there's any additional words of welcome now that we're recording that you'd like to share. Rhonda, same offer.
Just good morning and thank you so much for joining us. I think this is going to be a great presentation. This is one of the hot topics that always comes up, especially with all the different service categories we fund, and some of them are not necessarily clinical, so their data is not always so easy to pull out of areas. So we have some innovative options to share with you, which we shared with you last year, but just to retouch base on those. So hopefully we can, give you the opportunity to pick Michael's brain. He's our expert. And then we have Rhonda here, and anything I can help with, I'm happy to do that. And anything you guys want to share, tips and tools, bring those up as well. But thank you so much.
Fabulous. Thanks, Julie. And yes, we are all here for the picking. So just a couple of helpful hints. I'm sure that after 2 years, we're all very well accustomed to using Zoom, but you can press escape to exit full screen, hover over the top right of where the pictures are in order to change view options. You can close the pictures, you can have 1 or 2 pictures, or you can have as many of the different thumbnails as possible. We do highly encourage you to use your webcams if you have one, and if it works based on the bandwidth available in your home or office at this time. The webcams really help us to be able to interact with each other and to literally see each other and work with each other in a new and deeper way. We also encourage you to use the chat room. Sometimes you'll want to interrupt the conversation, raise your hand and ask a question out loud. That's okay, but also feel free to drop it in the chat room. We have some folks that are watching the chat room so that we can elevate your questions into the dialogue as we're going. It's also an opportunity for you to say a quick hello, how you doing to your colleagues and to interact with each other in those ways. As you've noted, the meeting is being recorded. This will be available for other members on your team who you think would be appropriate for the video, or as you hire new staff, or people have promotions or shift around. This video will be saved on the Dishes website and also the YouTube channel, so you'll be able to access this information and share it as needed and as appropriate. One thing that I'd like everyone on the call to do, just to kind of get us going and have a bit of an icebreaker, it is toward the end of summer. So if you could enter your name, your AA, and your favorite place to day trip in the chat room. I think many of us this year were excited to get out and about, but many of us probably still were relying more on day trips to get a change of scenery. So I'd love to hear your ideas. I'm less familiar with Texas myself, and it would be really wonderful to hear your ideas on what to see and where to go when in Texas for a day trip. So I'm going to try to manage the tagging the best I can. If I send you a request for just an update on what AA you're a part of, I will try to cross-reference the listing. But since I don't have the support of a co-presenter today, we might be handling this more toward the breakout. So please be patient with me. I'm doing the best I can. Actually, if you are able to add your own AA name at the end of your name, that would actually help me a great deal. And you can do that by hovering your mouse over the upper right corner of your picture and clicking rename, and then just going ahead and adding your AA name. No pressure, but if you can do that, that would be really great. So our learning objectives for today, I think our learning objectives helped to attract quite a few of you to this call, and it's a tall order for 90 minutes, but we're going to do our best to work our way through this and still involve plenty of opportunity for you guys to get involved and to ask questions. Some of this is actually a review based on other sessions that we provided in the past. This is, I believe, our 7th session that we have with all of you in the AA. So at the end of today's call, we're hopeful that you can name activities associated with CQM performance measurement you'll use to advise funded HIV provider organizations to complete, listing tools used to identify how many CQM performance measures are required for your funded HIV service provider organizations to report on, identifying the common threads between CQM performance measurement stipulated in PCN 1502 and measurement principles from achieving together, explain how to transcribe statewide and regional measurement priorities into your funded HIV service provider organization CQM process, and then finally describe appropriate approaches for measurement among your funded HIV service provider organizations to include non-clinical services. And this is key, right? A lot of the focus that we have in the Right Way HIV/AIDS program has been predominantly placed on clinical services, namely OAHS, which is great because, of course, as a person living with HIV, I too want to achieve a suppressed viral load. But we can't ignore the fact that many of the goals we have for treatment are supported by social determinants of health activities provided through our non-clinical supportive services. So we're going to be applying learning from the spring regarding how to use quantitative versus qualitative performance measurement approaches. And we'll also be applying learning regarding the use of community-based and stakeholder-driven processes to help us identify appropriate performance measures for our region. So as promised, that's a lot to cover in the space of an hour to 90 minutes, but we are going to do our best. So the toolkit that you'll be receiving following today's presentation, and as a reminder, everyone who registered, including those who weren't able to join us today, will receive the email with the toolkit. The toolkit has quite a bit of good stuff in it, so it's going to come in 2 emails. I recognize that some of your emails can't handle a message with more than 10 megs. So please forgive me, they'll be marked 1 of 2 and 2 of 2. But we have a number of articles that really help you to think about new wave quality now that we have big data. Girl, it is 2021. It is time to use the data. Put the data to work for us, which of course is the whole purpose behind our call. When we think about validation, when we think about what it means to have accurate information, how we unleash the power of data, you have an awful lot of resources here in terms of food for thought and just kind of out of the box other examples for how CQM performance measurement is such a vital component to the work that we do all together. So let's go ahead and dive right in and talk about subrecipients and performance measurement. And per usual, we are going to start with a poll. So let me pull that up. Launch. So we are looking for you to answer 4 questions for us. First, I understand what's expected of me as an AA regarding CQM performance measurement in my area. I am confident that my subrecipient provider organizations understand what is expected of them regarding CQM performance measurement in my area. Key nuance, right? I know what I'm doing versus I can help the people I'm in charge of to know what they're doing. Number 3, I am comfortable with the tools and approaches needed to support subrecipient provider organizations around CQM performance measurement. And then 4, we have integrated achieving together into our CQM performance measurement framework, at least in discussion. So I'm going to have a couple of moments here while you respond to this poll. And of course, the purpose behind these TA calls is to make sure that you do have the tools and resources. So there is no shame in saying, I don't get it quite yet, or I'm not quite there. That's why we're here. So don't be shy. Let us know how you feel about your readiness to do these activities. All right. Let's go ahead and share these results with you. So a lot of us actually are pretty confident that we know what's expected of us. So that's really great, that we don't have to spend too much time. That's getting Julie excited. Though we drop off a little bit when we think about our level of confidence in terms of how to work with our funded sub providers in our regions. We have a couple of folks disagreeing. In fact, they're like, I don't feel confident in how to get them to do what is expected of them. So that's really great that we have this opportunity to discuss today. And hopefully at the end of the training that will switch around. We have a similar pattern with people feeling that they need help with the tools and approaches. And that probably has to do with your level of confidence and readiness to support them, right? When you get a hard question from them in the field, you might feel like, oh no, I don't know how to answer that. And I think that that's really natural and normal and important to remember that you have, folks to fall back on like Julie and the syndicate and also me. And then finally, a lot of folks have been working to stand up achieving together in the region. This has been an area that we've seen a lot of change and growth in the last couple of months, which is fabulous. And of course, Rome isn't built in a day. And so we appreciate that there will be some folks that, haven't quite reached that level of readiness just yet. So thanks for participating. We'll have a couple more polls today. Let's quickly just do a reminder about how CQM works in the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program. We have a ball and pedestal model that has been put forward by our friends at the New York State Department of Health AIDS Institute and our partners at the HIV/AIDS Bureau for decades now. And the idea is that infrastructure supports a yin and yang approach between performance measurement and quality improvement. And it's really easy to over measure and under improve, or to not really have a good sense of measurement and to just go around and try to improve and fix stuff, polish. And the important thing here is that really QI and PM are yin and yang. They should be equivalent, they should be equal. And quality improvement is driven by PM. You need to have the data in order to improve. Otherwise, you could be making a mess. Even though we're experts in the field and we have a lot of passion and experience, that doesn't necessarily translate into excellence. You need to have the data. You need to have the data. So what does that mean when we think about performance measurement in the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program? Well, this slide comes from our intro presentation that we did, I think in November of 2020. And the idea here is that the measures are selected by the recipients. Well, so who is the recipient? The recipient in R, as a reminder, is DISHES. DISHES is the Part B recipient. And all of you are sub-recipients to DISHES. So you follow DISHES priorities and prerogatives. Now, the difference is if you have a Part A that is wholly overlapping with your area, then you also get to select, you also are a direct recipient, and you also get to select your own measures that are appropriate for the providers funded in your area. And if you're a mixed method where you have a large Part B service area and a Part A core, it's very important for you to remember that the people in that Part A core might have measures that are the same or different from your measures. And this is key to the system of care, right? It's really important that we try really hard in a cross-part way to be aligned. Even if we're not going to do exactly the same thing, we should try really hard to make life easy on the funded providers because their responsibility is to do what you say. That's their responsibility. You make a requirement for a measure, they must report it. They are contractually on the hook to do that. If they do not report the required measures, they are potentially exposing themselves to a letter of findings and the need to submit a corrective action plan as to why they are not following the contractually reported required guidance that you've provided. Now, there's a nuance here that I think is really important, and that is subrecipients should, in fact, be collecting measures of interest to them beyond what is required by DISHES or by additional Part A partners in our area. And all of this is really important that this is about driving endpoint HIV outcomes. This is not about monitoring and evaluation that, oh, you didn't achieve your target, therefore, you are responsible or on the fence for a plan of corrective action. No. In fact, the what I had mentioned before about the plan of corrective action comes from our counterparts in administration. We tell our counterparts in administration that people are not fulfilling their contractual obligations because they are not submitting the measures, and the admin people dish out the letter of findings. We do not. So there's a really important distinguishing line here between what we do in CQM and what our partners do in the rest of our office around this activity. We work together to make sure that all the funded providers understand the measures that are required and that they are working toward performance measurement that will indeed drive endpoint HIV health outcomes. So just a reminder, performance measures should focus on improving endpoint patient care, health outcomes, patient satisfaction experience, or as we'll see later, there are many opportunities for supportive programs to identify measures that are relevant to the services they provide and may be a little bit more proximal to the services they provide than the HIV care continuum. But we're going to be talking about these nuances in greater detail as we work our way through. We need all of our service providers to collect and analyze their performance data at least quarterly, but when it comes down to it, a lot of folks are probably collecting at least the measures that are important to them on a monthly basis, and that's okay too. We actually are encouraging people to be pursuing health disparities analysis. This is really important for Achieving Together. It's also really important for USDHE and for many of the other HIV priority initiatives that we're involved in. So just a reminder that we're looking for measures that are not about process. It's about outcomes. It is about collecting data at least quarterly, though more frequently is fine. And it's also about making sure that we're pushing people to be looking at health disparities and segmentation of data so that they can describe what is happening across key populations of service in our own regions. So how many measures are required? Well, CQM performance measurement is required in general, sure, but this is what it comes down to Part B with its service utilization and Part A with its service utilization. So we have two performance measures for any service category where more than 50% of the supported consumers receive at least one service unit. If it's between 15 and 50, 15 and 50, one performance measure. If we have a funded service where fewer than 15% of the clients receive at least one service, then no performance measurement is required. And these are the requirements issued by you, the AA, either on a pass-through basis based on what DSHS has set as an expectation, or generated based on your own work with your community around what is relevant to the members of your community and the people providing the services to people living with HIV in your community. So again, it's really important to remember that if you're funded, if you have a funding stream through your AA that's both Part A and Part B for the same service, you have to calculate your Part A utilization level, and that is the basis that you have for the number of measures. You will always have to report all the measures that are required by DSHS. So this is the old DSHS CQM PMs, and we left it here, but Julie actually has walked us, has created a new performance measurement presentation because the measures were recently updated. So I'm going to punt it over to Julie really quickly to walk us through that as I pull up that slide set. If I can find it, where is it? There it is.
Thank you, Michael. So every quarter I pull the STAR report and look at our utilization to see what has shifted. And there has been a couple of shifts since 2020. In 2020, medical case management was over 15% or close to. So we were doing performance measures for that. But since Q1 of 2021, it's shifted to non-medical case management. And then over the past year or so, referral for healthcare has skyrocketed. As all of you know, we have been really pushing care coordination, getting away from medical case management being gatekeepers. And it looks like everyone's getting the message because it's working based on utilization. You know, whatever the service you're performing, that's what you should be entering service units for it. Everything shouldn't be medical case management. So we've seen that. So we shifted our performance measures. We used to collect ARV prescription, but we realized that our data system was not very reliable on ARVs, and without getting folks EMR data sent to us, which would be a lot because we have over 37 or 38 outpatient ambulatory clinics, that it would be too challenging. So we have shifted to retention to care, the cascade measure, and viral suppression. And we look at this data individually by service category. We even break it down by subservice, but what we're going to show you today is another way to look at the data by combining those 3 service categories, and then what are the outcomes when they're combined. So as you can see, case management was at non-medical was at 16, outpatient ambulatory 35, and then referral for healthcare 63. So we know we need at least 2 measures for referral, and the others just need 1, but we're just going to go ahead and do 2 for all 3 of them because we're interested to know. There's how I pulled the data. I do this like all the time, but I just did it again this morning to make sure nothing shifted. So you can see that's how I determine how many service or how many performance measures I need to be looking at. So again, there's where I got that data. Over on the farthest right column, it lists how many are required by PCN 1502, but you can always do more, right? But you got to at least do the minimum. So that's our data. Here are our outcomes. Again, as I mentioned, I combined the 3 service categories. So of the folks that are accessing all 3 of those, these are the outcomes. So for retention is the blue bar, we're at 95%, and that's pretty consistent across the board, which I'm very pleased with. Even in spite or despite of the pandemic, somehow people are still making their 2 medical visits on the 2 different halves of the year. Viral suppression, it's a little lower than our overall score when we look at all the services combined. There, it's around 80, 81, but just these 3 alone, I think there's a lot of new clients that have new diagnoses that access non-medical and referral, right? Because then when they're just starting care, they're getting organized, seeing where they need to go. So Q1, we were at 78%, and then Q2, we went up to 1% to 79, which is good. So far, we only have 2 quarters worth of data this year because we're not at the end of September yet. So after about November 15th, I'll pull the data for Q3 and so on and so forth. But that's where we're at for now. I used Aries for my data source. I get the utilization from STAR, and these are the CQM indicators and the numerators and denominators, if anyone's interested in that, in the performance measure descriptors. So again, the data source I use the STAR port for utilization, like we showed you, and the CQM report for the performance measure outcomes, and those are the filters I applied. The date range, of course, will vary depending on which quarter you're looking at, but everything else, I try to keep this so that I use the same filters every time. You know, sometimes I might adjust them, but when I have like a standing, you know, I'm going to look at these same performance measures, I need to look at them the same way. Anybody have questions real quick on that? I know we have a lot to cover, but that's pretty much it for the new performance measures for 2021. Thank you, Michael.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie. And since this was included as an attachment, you can definitely expect to find that as an attachment in your toolkit as well, in addition to all those great articles. So be on the lookout for it and take Julie up on our offer for any questions and concerns that have occurred to you. All right. So optional measures. This is a really important nuance here, right? Because there's what's contractually obligated, and then there is what is good beyond what is contractually obligated. Subrecipient provider organizations are in fact encouraged to collect and monitor additional performance measures. And what does this mean? Well, it's based on the services provided. It's based on the culture and perspective of the service organization. They should be kept alongside the required measures. In other words, the people who are providing services in your field should have one list of, what they consider to be their measures. And they should indicate which measures are the ones that are required by funding and what are the ones that they're tracking internally. They should all live on a dashboard so that we can compare them side by side and look at how we're progressing. They should be rooted in an evidence base as well. Even if we know that the intersection of HIV in a specific service, say food or housing, might be more evidence informed than evidence based, the idea is that we have been creating our own evidence base in Ryan White for the last 20 years. So we should continue that trend, by encouraging people to be innovative and think outside the box, as long as it meets these four opportunities, right? These four conditions. We're really looking for opportunities for innovation. So, we're looking for something that's care continuum based, or something that's a combined HIV care continuum plus the relevant service that you are providing to the people living with HIV in your catchment area. It could be something that's interdisciplinary too, like I just said. It could be a combination of how the different services that you provide commingle or come together for patients. This is really cool, thinking about the data that Julie just shared, for example. There is a nuance between patients that receive 3 services versus patients that receive 1 service. Go ahead and calculate it, or encourage people to think about the unique position that they have and the services they're providing. What role do you play in the safety net? And why does that amount to a hill of beans? Show me with the data. There are a lot of ways that we could be, innovative here. And from where I stand, the best way to be innovative, maybe I'm biased as a person living with HIV, but the best way to be innovative is to go ahead and include a wide circle of people in this conversation. Include your staff members at all levels. Include some people living with HIV who receive the services so that they can weigh in and share with you, or share with the agencies on the ground, what are the most important things to include that factor into the care that's being dispensed and the outcomes that are received or achieved on the basis of the services being dispensed. So as Julie had mentioned, if you're a Part B only AA, you got a little bit off the hook here, right? Because DSHIS will provide you with the required measures. The syndicate is DSHIS' opportunity to bring together people to have this large stakeholder approach. And we've heard that before, right? There's not a small group of people in DSHIS kind of like wringing their hands and saying, this is how measurement will work. Absolutely not. Syndicate actually is an opportunity for people from many different backgrounds and interests to weigh in on what is an important measure. The measures are all calculated using ARIES, and when we round that corner into HERAR, they'll likely be calculated automatically by HERAR as well. That's not to say that you shouldn't occasionally run those filters in the STAR report that Julie was just saying. In fact, you should. It's really important. But Part B DSHIS staff does tabulate this on the back end as well. And it's really important for you to understand, great, got it. We have some required measures, but what else are people doing in my field? What else are the funded providers in my region doing to make sure that they are, providing excellent quality service and that clients are actually achieving optimal health outcomes as, based on these services? In having these types of conversations and having that information at your fingertips, you can start to make better connections between agencies that will augment their learning. And you get to be out of the way. You let the agencies talk among themselves as case management providers or as multi-service centers about what is compelling and important to them. If you are also a Part A or you have a Part A core, it's a little bit trickier for you. You could probably still use ARIES and HERAR to identify the services that meet the thresholds for measures, and you can still use those same reports, but you would want to do it on the basis of the Part A funding as opposed to the Part B funding. That's the nuance there. But you calculate the utilization, based on the Part A services that are provided, and identify how many measures are required. And it's important that you identify relevant outcome measures. And you do that by involving stakeholders. You involve the direct funded agencies. You involve people living with HIV at your level in the AA in order to create these measures. We did something like this in Dallas recently, where we actually identified that for the clinical services, we want to have care continuum based quantitative measures, but for the supportive services, like outreach, like non-medical case management, like medical transportation, what's more important is a patient-reported outcome. And the system didn't make the decision, the funded providers made that decision. Really important, right? That also gets their buy-in, supposedly. And then finally, if you do have a Part A in the mix, you want to create a mechanism for reporting. So you need to say, hi, we have measures. We've published our measures. These are it. For TA, contact so-and-so. When you report your measures, rely on ARIES, or we want your measures to come out of your EHR and to be sent to us using this form by this date. So you need to have a system in place really to track the data, collect the data, provide feedback on the data, to trend the data internally. And so if you have a Part A in your mix as an AA, then it's a little bit trickier and you have a little bit more homework than if you are a Part B only AA. And that's the important nuance. But as you can see at the Part B level, at the Part A level, and also at the direct service level, the most important aspect here is stakeholder involvement. What is the purpose of the services we are providing, and what does that mean for the people who are receiving these services? So in other words, ARIES, Excel, community engagement, using key community engagement activities that we've described previously would be the main tools and approaches and methods that are relevant for this process here. So this next piece, how do we make performance measurement relevant? This is a common complaint, and we've probably grumbled about this ourselves in different roles that we've had in the service system over time. But what role, I think the important question to ask here is, what role or roles does the organization play in your regional service system? How does the organization work with other funded and non-funded entities in the region to generate the safety net? Why are we caring about non-funded stuff? Well, if we want to achieve together and end the epidemic, we got to get off of our island, kids. We have to interact with the other people who are serving the same clients. And also, our clients don't come from nowhere. We've talked as a system, a national system, for over a decade now, that Ryan White is kind of a revolving door. We have people with Medicaid, but then something happens to their Medicaid coverage and they're Ryan White. We have people with private insurance, but then something traumatic happens and they lose that private insurance, and guess what? Ryan White. So it's really important for us to think more broadly than just the Ryan White services when we're thinking about the role that individual service providers play in the HIV service environment that they're a part of. Really important, how are staff and patients involved in creating these measures? And what do the measures mean to them? This takes it out of the hands of a couple of leaders at the top of an organization and really spreads that love around to make sure that people who are credibly and meaningfully involved in the service system, by laying hands on people or having hands laid on them, are involved in self-determination and co-design. I think I've hit on this a couple of times in today's call, but the most important thing you can do when creating measures is to make sure that you have a big table with people who have something to say, having a seat at that table. Now, this is an area that I think is really exciting. Are there adaptations to the HIV care continuum for given services? When we think about something like behavioral health is a clinical service in its own right, and it is a really important predictor of whether or not people will have, good achievement on the HIV care continuum. It's also a driving force behind people's barriers in achieving, on the HIV care continuum. But this process is somewhat separate. Same for housing, right? Housing is medicine. We could say food is medicine too. In fact, there are lots of papers out there about that exact thing. So we can find opportunities to connect what we're doing in food or housing or behavioral health to the HIV care continuum. And we can talk about this in an abstract way, or we can go ahead and try to align them the best we can to create what we call a combined care continuum. We've probably seen this an awful lot when we think about prevention care continuums and the HIV care continuum, right? Because we usually say the bar before the bars, or the left side of the continuum. What about the left side? And that's what we're talking about, the combined prevention and treatment HIV care continuum. So we can extend this thinking and this line of reasoning to be more inclusive of some of these other services that are in fact clinical in nature, or vital to our ability to maintain an ongoing relationship with HIV medical care. So there are numerous ways to make performance relevant. We don't have to be like, you got a bus pass, what's that mean for your viral load? That's when people start complaining and where it's really hard for systems to be able to connect those dots. Can you produce the data? Sure, but what does it mean? The most important thing is to have meaningful data, thinking about that yin yang. If you don't have meaningful data to drive improvement, you're basically just standing, smiling in a hula hoop over and over and over again, trying to convince people to hula hoop with you. I'm sure that might sound familiar to some of you. And we can get out of that cycle by really trying to make things relevant and meaningful for people. How? By involving them in the conversation to begin with. So I just want to pause right there to see if there's any questions or concerns based on the presentation so far. All right, this is an area where I think quite a few of you were experiencing a level of comfort and confidence. Go ahead, Julie.
Can you share an example of what Dallas did for those support service categories specifically? Like for the qualitative, the approach you used?
Absolutely. So what we did was we identified which service categories would have required measures and how many. Then we identified among those who are the people funded for those services, and they were invited to send a representative to a call. There were 2 calls. The first call was exploratory, a reminder about what is CQM performance measurement and kind of baseline expectations of how that works. Then starting to think about what does this service mean to your agency as you provide it? And what does the service mean to your clients as your agency provides it to your clients? How would your clients feel, or what would they do if your service went and disappeared tomorrow? What would it mean for them? So we started to have a conversation about, is this something we can quantify, or is this something that we need to get out of the hearts and minds of our clients? And it was determined that for many of these supportive services, the second is what's needed. We need a qualitative measure. So the second meeting then was thinking about all of these different concrete elements. So we have our service standards say, unit of service includes X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about the different importance to clients about these different service elements. And so we created a survey question that people who receive a service in a given quarter will be distributed a link to respond to a Qualtrics survey that takes less than 3 minutes to complete. And they have the opportunity to basically talk about or to share what the service meant to them in terms of achieving health goals, in terms of achieving other treatment goals, incidental benefits, thinking about social determinants of health, incidental benefits of receiving a service and how that added value to our patients' lives beyond just the stated purpose. So it was a really cool opportunity for people to be involved in system co-design at a level that they'd never been involved before, and also to think creatively and collaboratively about the system of care that they are building together. Now, the challenge is, when you invite everybody to the dance and people have different moves, how you get people to dance together. And so that's the art of, helping people to understand that, quality is a cha-cha. You take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and we get there eventually together. Yes, we don't make perfect the enemy of good, and we do what we can do when we can do it. And so this helps people to a certain extent feel more comfortable, but it also then still allows for people to kind of shake and rattle and to share their opinions on this. There does come a point in time that if people are recalcitrant and saying, I'm not gonna, I don't wanna, then you kind of fall back on, the hard line. Well, unfortunately, you accepted millions of dollars by signing this contract and you're kind of on the hook. So you can choose not to participate, and then that puts future funding at risk. And of course, that is your decision to make. I don't know if anyone from the Dallas area wants to share a little bit about what this process has been like, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Oh boy.
Get it, Regina.
Good morning, everyone. what I would just say to that is it is been a process of being patient too, you know, throwing in that patience. And I love that what Michael always saying is being kind to ourselves, because we think about have to move ourselves away from thinking about agency need, but thinking about that client and what the needs of the client are going to be from every aspect of their life, whether it's their transportation needs, whether it's their food need, whatever that is taking a step back and taking a look at that. I think that's what was more important, that we had to drive forward in a lot of our work group meetings and the breakout meetings for our performance measures. Thank you.
I love that. And, you know, as we were working through and conducting the provider level OAs for all of the funded providers, we were able to kind of understand agencies that are providing certain feedback may be full of hot air and other stuff that we won't say on a professional call that's being recorded, you know, and we can tell that because guess what? You don't have an appropriate or meaningful consumer involvement mechanism. You're just making it up, honey. But for those agencies that do have substantial and meaningful consumer involvement mechanisms, okay, I can start to trust the things that you're saying a little bit more than some of the other guys. And we're able to think about how we involve our clients at that organizational level based on this established structure that we've gone through and given you top marks on.
Hi, this is Angie. Michael, if I could, I would just add to, in addition to what you all said, we've seen too some of the challenges in that we are not as system focused as we thought we were or hoped to be, and that we, you know, really need to be more patient centered, as Regina said. A lot of times, even, you know, multiple agencies may provide the same service category, but there are different nuances, and so they're thinking about, you know, what it means to them and to their clients. And we really had to, you know, try to get everybody, we talk about, you know, what hat are you wearing, you know, at that time. And we have to kind of, you know, we all wear various hats and we have to kind of see it from different perspectives simultaneously at times. And then it's also important too, to bring, you know, all of the important stakeholders to the table so that we can make sure that we're getting good input, you know, comprehensive and thorough. And so I think we did a pretty good job with this first go around and trying to get, you know, we had some people who did not participate in the beginning, you know, almost like the little red hen, you know, they didn't help bake the cake. And then it was time to eat the cake. You know, they didn't want to just eat the cake, but they wanted to complain about the ingredients that went in the cake. And they had all these different opportunities to provide feedback. So I think we got lots of, we did, you know, pretty well. And then for the next iterations, we'll incorporate some improvement and some feedback, you know, that we glean from the process.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for that. And I think that this is a wonderful segue into this next section, supportive services 2, how to make it work for our subrecipients that come in all shapes, sizes, and service compendia. So I'm going to kick off another poll here. Launch. And really what we're trying to do here is, is to identify whether or not we have comfort and confidence in setting expectations for CQM performance measurement for providers of different types. This is a select all that apply because we want to see how you feel about different types of providers, understanding they come in all shapes and sizes. The next question is subrecipient HIV provider organizations funded that are non-clinical can meet regional expectations. Yes or no, or you're not sure, which is also okay. And then also my AA has created opportunities for non-funded parties to participate in regional discussions regarding performance measurement. So thinking about folks that, you know, are either large hospitals and health centers that serve a lot of third party, or some of the agencies that are also safety net, but are just funded by other non-Ryan White streams, among others. And then lastly, my AA has created opportunities for non-funded parties to participate in reporting performance measurement data relevant to achieving together our other key priorities. This is a really tricky one because a lot of our systems are really calibrated toward responding to the funding that we're issuing. But if we ever want to achieve together and end the HIV epidemic, it's important for us to think about how the heck we're going to make this happen down the line. So I'll just wait a couple of moments while you think about these and fill in this survey. Waiting for some more responses here, because this is gold for us as planners to have an understanding of where you have a high level of confidence and where we can help you out. And also, is there any role that the syndicate can play in helping to have an ongoing discussion or machine to be able to chew and crunch these issues with you? And I'll be really excited to share these results back with you in just a couple of moments. I'm hoping that we can just get a couple of more people to reply here. I know that these are lengthy questions and you're reviewing and thinking, so I'm not trying to rush. I'm just being excited. All right, I'm going to close the poll in about 5 seconds, just so that you know to click submit if you're almost there. All right. So we can see that everyone replying to the poll is confident in the clinical providers. That makes sense. We have had so many resources around this for a very long time. But people in the community in the field have been, trying to poke and prod and plead to get some of this other stuff to happen. Prevention, for example, is a very evaluation-minded setup, but they are not quality focused. And this is a huge problem. As Ryan White providers, we know that quality is so important and we need to have an improvement mind frame. HOPWA, it's really great that people feel confident in doing quality with HOPWA as well. And we start to fall down a little bit when we are talking about provider organizations that offer a blend of services, because my guess is that some of those organizations will try to emphasize one service over the other, and they're not really reporting a complete picture of the quality of the services they provide. The second question, it's interesting that we have more than half of people feeling that their non-clinical providers can meet the expectations, but I think that the not sure is coming from a sense that we don't really have the data ourselves as administrative agents on where people are actually, making a difference. And, just because people are reporting data doesn't mean that it's good data or the right data, right? So I have a sense that that's where some of your not sures are coming from. Definitely react to all these comments that I'm making in the chat room. 3, about half of you have said that your AA has created opportunities for non-funded folks to discuss performance measurement. And we've had only a couple of folks who have been able to allow non-funded parties to participate in these. We might be reaching out to some of you to get your sense around how you do this, because the syndicate, I'm sure, will be super interested in how you are driving innovation in your area. This is incredibly innovative. And, I'm surprised that there are any of you who are doing this. And I think that you deserve a lot of applause and accolades for pushing the envelope in this way to achieve together and to end the HIV epidemic. So thanks again for participating in that poll. It's always so helpful to see where we're at. So let's just think about achieving together in SDOH. We'll take a little bit of a step back for our social determinants, because social determinants are what social service providers are all about. I would argue that the needs assessment for your region should be rooted in key elements for achieving together. Achieving together itself is based on a really robust needs assessment and set of activities that the state has been undertaking for quite some time. So for you to pick up the threads that are left by our state partners makes a great deal of sense, and actually is evidence informed, because you're basing your activity on the evidence-based activities that have occurred preceded this at the state. So think about that and engage your stakeholders around this issue. You can use the Achieving Together framework in strategic conversation as well. Just thinking about that picture, right, of the person and then the circles around them. and then all the different services that kind of affect them from the prevention side, and then the other arrows on the treatment side. Just plop that sucker on a screen and say, where do you see yourselves in this framework? And go one by one and let them talk about this together. How do they know when they've done a good job? What are their measures of utilization? What are their measures of success? I would actually argue that you would want to ask each of the agencies first to go through and talk about where they see themselves, and to have this second bullet as a separate conversation, because you want people to be able to, interact off of each other, which means you go around the circle once, you go around the circle a second time, because that allows for people more time to think and to really explore this in themselves as others are talking, as opposed to just going around the circle once. You can identify qualitative measures to use as a system. So HSD-wide patient experience evaluation or staff experience evaluation. You can think about this in terms of, an overall client satisfaction survey, but you could also think about this in terms of individual measures like we had just discussed, happen in Dallas. And this could take the place of one of those required measures for a given service category based on the needs of your service providers and clients. You could also carry over measures that are included in your regional EHD plans for those of you that are part of a region that's a priority 1 jurisdiction. So I've seen the statewide plan, and I know that the statewide plan has these work plans kind of sectioning out different regions. And there's an opportunity for you to see measures that kind of like talk out of the page at you based on that work plan. Some of the work plans actually include measures themselves anyway. So you can actually do yourselves a favor, don't recreate the wheel, and base this off ongoing work. That also aligns things more tightly and closer together, and it makes your providers feel seen and heard. It also makes them feel as though they're participating in something that's rigorous and lean, right? They're not having to recreate wheels. They're not having to report 10,000 different indicators to different parties that are nuanced in some way. So we really encourage you as AAs, particularly AAs that are having to create their own measures that are Part A, but even AAs that aren't, that are working on the field, in the field to help agencies to create relevant measures for the services they provide. You have all of these different opportunities available to you to think about how you provide that level of TA and guidance to agencies, to encourage them to be excited, to encourage them to be innovative, and to get off their butts in terms of performance measurement that leads itself to quality improvement and endpoint HIV health outcomes. So I've emphasized this a lot, but I'm going to go ahead and keep emphasizing that stakeholders matter. If you don't have a Part A core, it's unlikely you'll need to create your own regional system level measures. The exception is for regional system experience evaluations, as I said. Like it's good for AAs, for each of you to have your own system-wide experience evaluation, either survey or focus group or some way for you to talk credibly and meaningfully about what this means to the people you are ultimately serving. To Angie's point, this takes it out of agency says this, agency thinks that. That's very well and nice, but what does the client think? I'm far more interested in what the client thinks. If you do have a Part A core, it's important that you include stakeholders of different types in your measurement development discussions. So again, that is providers and that is consumers. And even thinking about consumers beyond people living with HIV, we come from somewhere. So include some folks who are key opinion leaders that are part of our antecedent communities. So there might be a trans health service organization that has never really been able to achieve funding by you, but they speak for the trans community in your area. You better include them in that conversation, right? Because they're serving a key service population that is going to be important to your thinking about the way that the system works overall. You should also advise agencies to leverage their stakeholders in creating their own measures. And I've emphasized this a number of times too. Each of us at all of our levels is responsible for systems measurement and for designing a system that really helps us to understand what is happening through the services we provide. And of course, that means that the providers need to do this as well. The providers should be using their CQM committees for this. Their CQM committees should be formalized per the contracts that they've signed off on. And those CQM committees should include a cross-section of staff and a couple of key consumers. So when we think about quantitative versus qualitative, we've hit on this a couple of times too, but the important thing here, and the message that's been coming from the field for the 10 years since we've had the care continuum, is supportive services don't have proximity to the HIV care continuum. You know, in other words, the supportive services we provide may not speak to the HIV care continuum. How does giving a bus pass relate to viral suppression? There is a way to make that happen, but oh my gosh, is that complicated and rigorous. Instead, you can create a parallel continuum based on the service in question. If you're thinking about medical case management and people who have acuity that brings them in and then they graduate out, right? Graduation is the endpoint outcome. So you can create a care cascade. Who's come in and who comes out? What is the timeline? What does that look like? What are their activities that are provided that help to graduate people? What are the things that seem nice, but basically make a whole lot of work for our staff, but don't lend itself to graduation? You can create combined care continua, blending the new service care continuum with the HIV care continuum as well. And I have an example of that in just a moment, where you can see how the state of New Jersey created a blended HIV and behavioral health care continuum to get at the nature of the combined services and what that means for people who receive both. You can alternatively generate qualitative measures. So again, focused on patient-reported outcome measures. These are of great interest, by the way, to the National Quality Forum and other measurement leaders. And as you work to potentially develop qualitative measures, I would encourage you to reach out to me and other people with connections to the National Quality Forum so that we can help to highlight the great work you're doing as visionary leaders for service development in our country. And we can also leverage existing quantitative measures that are off focus because they point to the process instead of the outcome, or measure something that isn't fully related to the service being delivered. So we should not focus on process measures. We should focus on outcome measures. We want to focus on outcome measures that are relevant to the services that we're providing, which is why sometimes quantitative doesn't work as well. Quantitative is how many bus passes did you hand out? I don't care about that, frankly, as a person living with HIV. I, as a person living with HIV, care about how that bus pass made a difference in someone's life. The taxi voucher, how did that make a difference in someone's life? I don't care how many taxi vouchers you gave out. That doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't. And it shouldn't. What is important is what that means to the person who got it. So always think about, trying to retire anything that is too process oriented and call out or call in people that are focusing on process oriented measures because they don't understand the difference between QA and QI. Processes are QA. QI is about improvement. Outcomes are about improvement. And that's enshrined in PCN 1502. Clear and plain as day. So I'm speeding up my cadence here because we're including adult principles of helpful redundance and repetition. But I want to see if this conversation, kind of shook loose any feelings or reactions about this. I see Christy had made a comment about some of the service providers have information reporting and collaboration, but we don't have access to information that is owned at the provider level. I think it's really an important nuance here, Christy. The Texas culture for the way that things operate is agencies own clients. Agencies are then responsible for serving clients and coordinating the care of the clients. And what we do at the administrative agency level is to support that activity. We shouldn't be in the role of trying to say, these are your clients here that are getting services there, and you guys need to work together, because that inappropriately interjects us as people who are trying to control the clients. When the agencies really are the ones who are serving the clients, they know the clients best. So what I would encourage, Christy, is to engage people in a conversation about what information they have about external service providers. Do all the different people who are funded in your AA region have access to this information? And to what extent do they have access to this information?
And so this was in response to the last poll and the last two questions.
Yeah.
And so, so I suppose they have information. I can think of one of our agencies in particular, two, where they have information, but I just haven't thought of getting it. And I'm sure that at least two of them would totally share that information with us. And so
Super exciting.
And so one of the agencies I'm thinking of in particular, they're 5 hours away from us. So we don't see them a lot, and especially in the last 18 months, we haven't seen them at all. So so it's not like we meet with the folks at Shannon's Board of Health Services all the time, because they're 5 hours away from us. So and they would give us anything we wanted, but we just haven't thought to get it. And so I'm making notes while we talk, and so I will. That's one of my notes to get some more information from them.
Hooray! So some of this content is helping, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. I have lots of. I make notes during all of these calls.
Yay!
Well, that's fabulous. Any other reactions to this section before we move on and talk about the OA and how to use the OA to do this kind of work?
Well, I personally really feel like the qualitative measure approach is really enlightening on what you need to improve on, right? When you just continue to measure viral suppression and maybe it's not going up, it's really hard to identify why. But when you get it straight out of the patient or client's perspective, you know, and if enough people are saying the same thing, maybe that's where we need to go. So I like that.
I like that too. I am biased as a person living with HIV. All right, now we're going to get really wonky with you guys. I know that a number of you were saying that you were starting to consider implementation of the organizational assessment, or that you've already implemented. So now we want to just know what your level of confidence and comfort is around these areas. So what's your level of confidence in assessing people based on domain C performance measurements? Well, how about domain G outcomes assessment? Or how about domain H care continua? And lastly, the dreaded domain I integrated CQM. These last three are really tricky because the tool itself has some language based in that, you know, points more at the clinical services. So we're actually in the process in Dallas right now. We're revising this based on some of this feedback. So I'd love to know what your feedback and thoughts are on this. How confident do you feel about doing this? And it might be neutral if you feel confident for some providers and totally not confident for other providers. And I think that that's okay. I think it's also okay to be like, I don't feel confident about that at all, Michael, because it's a new process, you know, and also the fact that it is a little challenging sometimes to get people to think outside of the limited circle that they find themselves in as a certain type of provider. Like we do have standalone legal providers, or standalone dental providers, or standalone counseling providers. So these can be some of the trickiest folks to work with regarding this level of assessment and our confidence in delivering this assessment. So I'm going to leave this poll open for about another 20 seconds or so, just so that we can chase in a couple more responses, because I'm really interested in how you feel about this and how you feel about providing this assessment to folks, because this is the topic of the day. And we are trying to use our work around this assessment to help drive the TA that we're providing to folks in the field. I'll leave it open for another 5 seconds here. So we have folks who are a little shyer this time in responding, but I will still share. We had maybe 25% fewer responses this time, but we have folks feeling moderately comfortable about the long-standing domain C. Domain C has been part of the organizational assessment since the beginning of the organizational assessment. So a lot of folks feel comfortable around this piece. It's rooted in stakeholder engagement, it's rooted in communication, it's rooted in whether we validate and how we measure. This next piece on outcomes is also, you know, interesting to see that folks feel on this one. You know, I feel that some of the lack of comfort is around how the questions are geared toward outcomes of interest, because it's like you have to do retention, you have to do viral suppression. But as we've been discussing, we might want to scale that language back some to talk about, I don't know, outcomes of interest that are proximal to the services being provided. 3, we have a lot of folks that are kind of like on the care continuum piece. And this makes a lot of sense because our development as a field for this is all new. Our federal partners were like, if it's not the HIV care continuum, you've got to try again. And that's what they said for a very long time. And depending who you ask at HAB, guess what? That's still what they're saying. But there are other people who are the true thought leaders in HAB who are really thinking about ending the HIV epidemic and how things work together. And that's why thinking about care continua in this novel way is so important. When we think about integrated CQM, this is where we have the least level of comfort. And I think that this is something that is some of the trickiest to communicate. And I am seeing that we are probably not going to have time for our breakouts today because I want to make sure that we really hammer in on some of these points, and maybe we can draw some of the breakout conversation into an open dialogue. But these are some of the really important mechanics of how to bring all this theoretical stuff we've been discussing to life. So let's go ahead and take a look. So meaningful stakeholder involvement in system co-design and planning evaluation is what Achieving Together is about. It's also front center in Achieving Together. It's part of Fast Track Cities. It's the National HIV/AIDS Strategy. Almost every single HIV priority initiative that touches us is about meaningful stakeholder engagement. Also, we have networks that can provide substantial support and resources to providers. This is thinking about how you support the agencies and how DISHS supports you in the context of Achieving Together. But in PCN 1502, that's one of the top things that we talk about, right? In fact, that was what we saw in one of those opening slides that is an echo from what our learning was last year. Our role is to provide these substantial resources to the people providing services in the field. We also got to document the process. We have to have data, we have to have information. We can't be guessing about this. We can't rely on a hunch. We can't rely on what our gut tells us. No, we have to have documented processes. We have to have data to help us base our decision making processes. And then of course, we should have collaborative efforts. We shouldn't be thinking about ourselves in RIY as an island. Achieving Together with a status neutral approach brilliantly describes this. We also can't be thinking that, well, I'm only a little counseling provider. What am I gonna do? A lot, you do a lot. Or I'm only a housing provider, a lot, you do a lot. So we need to be thinking about collaborative efforts. So this measures to the OA in terms of domain B, workforce engagement, domain C, CQM performance measurement, domain D, quality improvement, domain E, consumer involvement, domain G, achievement of outcomes, domain H, the HIV care continuum, and domain I, care integration. There was actually a really tight agreement here in terms of frameworks and what our role and responsibility is at the AA in terms of how to get the providers to do the right thing in the field. I wanted to share this with you because this is an example of how New Jersey created its combined care continuum. So we have our usual HIV care continuum at the top, with our usual steps that we see with the HIV care continuum. So our stakeholder leaders in the state of New Jersey and with the AATC's assistance thought, well, what does this look like for people in behavioral health? Let's ignore HIV and just think about people in the behavioral health system, which can come from any self-report or self, kind of like interest, but is usually driven by some type of screening activity that a primary care provider is administering. So how do these two different care continua combine to come together? This is about people with HIV having screenings, being evaluated, being linked when appropriate to treatment, having evidence-based treatment, and then being retained in the high frequency behavioral health service, right? Because we know behavioral health services can be multiple times weekly. And then we have our silly old retention, in HIV, which is looking for 2 visits a year, right? we need to think about a framework that is about making sure that people are retained in both. And in fact, that theoretically, people who are retained in behavioral health will be easier to retain in medical care. And that is in the literature ad nauseum. Then it makes sense. It will have improvement in both HIV health outcomes that are driven by improvement in behavioral health outcomes. So I would encourage you to think about this with your stakeholders. Does this behavioral health combined continuum work for you? How could I create one for food service or for housing service? How could I create one for medical transportation? The steps will be different because they're different services that serve different roles in the service safety net that we've created. But the process conversationally and intellectually is a similar parallel process regardless of the service. It involves your stakeholders. So tailoring language for intent is really important. This OA was last updated in 2017 before the EHE or Achieving Together frameworks were even developed. And as a result, it's still overly focused on HIV clinical care to the detriment of other key aspects of the safety net that we've created. We created the safety net to address social determinants of health. So we are fools if we are not looking at tracking that information and how what we're doing makes a difference in terms of social determinants of health. So DISHIS has revised the OA for you all, and it's incumbent on us to revise the OA in ways that make it relevant and poignant for the services provided in our service systems. And this isn't to say that you should take your red pen and go at it alone, but you should involve your stakeholders, including DISHIS, including consultants like me, in what this means. And of course, we would want you to pay very close attention to domains G, H, and I to ensure that language is calibrated to the organization that you're assessing. This might mean you have a couple of different versions of the OA that speak to the different organizations and the service mixes that they're funded to provide. This helps to escape, the, oh, what about this? What about that? Or, you don't really care about my agency or the services I provide. We want to get around that BS, which is part of the games that people play to avoid doing real work in the field. They call a spade, but that's what it is. So let's look at how that happened. So for integrated care, the one that we are least confident around, you'll see that the language here was shifted significantly away from, how does everything else play into clinical? That's not what it's about. This is about to what extent does the HIV program incorporate services beyond the main services provided by that organization and involve their staff in its CQM program process and QI activities. So you can see by the time we get to a score of 2, secondary internal services or externally provided service QI efforts are often separate, but they are reported to the QM program. You can see here that this is actually a really tough question. Most of us in the service industry do not have these opportunities to let in external people. We also don't send emissaries from our program to their programs. But guess what? We probably should, because we are serving the same clients. The client has the same needs regardless of where they're going, but different agencies have a different understanding on what those needs are based on the services being provided and the timeline and the sequencing of the services being provided to real people in real time. Here's the example of how the care continuum, domain H, was revised. To what extent does the HIV program routinely generate and use facility level care continuum to drive their improvement and address gaps? That wasn't revised. What was revised was what we're talking about in terms of what care continuum. So look at a score of 2 here. Facility can annually construct a continuum that reports rates of care markers along a care continuum for funded services. So, for example, OAHS, medical case management, non-medical case management, APA, might use linkage, retention, and HIV medical care, ARV prescription, and viral suppression. Whereas mental health and substance use will use linkage and retention in behavioral health services and other relevant outcomes to behavioral health services. You can see here how this kind of ramps up and is reflected in the future higher score of 3 as well. This is all about customization, and customization occurs in concert and collaboration with the funded service providers, who are their stakeholders. So we're going to Oh, I see Christy has a question, I think. Christy, would you like, oh, you're just reacting to the gardens. All of the pictures and images today are rooted in beautiful, out of the box kind of thinking for gardens that come from all over the world, North America, South America, Asia, Australia, and Africa. Pretty fun. So we were going to do a breakout, and because we only have about 5 minutes left, what I'd like to do is just to quickly look at an example. This example we were most comfortable with. So I don't know if anyone wants to kind of shout out what they think would be an important piece of technical assistance advice that they would give to an agency that had this assessment result. What story is being told by this assessment? And what advice could we give to the provider in the field to get to a 3? So what I see here is an organization that considers itself a data to care organization. They say, oh, we've got measures. Oh, we have information. But when you think about, well, what is that information? And what does it mean? This information is mostly collected and managed by people in a silo in the organization. They don't talk about the information really with other people. They're just like, this is our score, next. And it's really important to remember what? We have to involve our stakeholders. We have to involve our stakeholders. We have to involve our stakeholders. So that means that when you have results of information, first of all, you should make sure that that information is accurate by having a validation process and that it's easy to understand what the information is trying to tell you. And then once you've done that homework and you have a sense of how that information tells a story, you should be sharing that story. Share that story with your staff. Get their input. If an agency can make those 2 changes, have a process to review its data and to discuss what it means, and then also to share the damn information with others, they will get a 3. 2 small steps that might be a big psychological hurdle for an organization that tends to operate in silos. But it's actually not that big of a climb if they can start to get rid of that silo. How about this one in G? What would we recommend? And again, here for trivia fans, you can see how the language was adjusted to speak to agencies that are non-clinical. We're not only looking at retention and viral suppression, which is how this is originally mentioned, written. Instead, we're looking at measures to routinely review and guide improvement activities, including the HIV care continuum or other care continuum information. And we should be comparing our data to a larger data set for at least 2 relevant outcome measures. Any advice from anyone on the call around what we would advise folks in the field for this? So something that we focus on a lot and we've talked about a lot is outcomes and outcome measurement. And when we as a part B or part A or part AB, AA come out with our measures and we publish them, they're outcome focused and oriented because that's what PCN 1502 says we need to do. But we should also think about all of the other data that the agency is collecting as a part of their dashboard or their measurement mechanisms beyond what's required. And so what happens is you either have agencies that are really only focused on what's required because they're going to check that box, or they say, I have my information there, sure, because they said I have to have it, but I'm really interested in just this. it's really important and incumbent on the direct service providers to have results for all of their measures, and they should look at all of the results, and they should treat all of the results on parity, which means that they should be shared with their stakeholders through their CQM committee and through other opportunities, and that all of these different groups should have an opportunity to weigh in on what the data says to them and what recommendations they would have to help drive improvement in outcomes. And a lot of times people suddenly become focused on processes. That's fine, as long as that process is tied to the outcome. So we want trends for the measures to be reported and to show some improving trends over time. No one's perfect, and you don't build Rome overnight. The lines will go up and down. But do you have a line? Are we trying to get people to just show us 45% and 17% and 90%? Or are we trying to have these data arrayed in a way that we can actually see a story coming off the page at us? The comparison to larger aggregate data sets is something that's really challenging, because this is talking about what percentile performance you have. So I need my agency to be compared with 100 other agencies or 30 other agencies. And where do we get a data set to be able to do that? This is the hardest part. And this is where we as a field need to be better at innovating collaboratively. And that the role that we have as a dental program in Texas, where there may not be other dental programs in our AA region to be able to compare with, but there probably are a couple others in the state, and there are absolutely others across the whole US of A. So we should be trying to find the opportunities to come together to work collaboratively and identify how to benchmark against each other, or how to identify and lift up appropriate data sets for comparative benchmarking. And when we do a comparative benchmark, we should say, oh, we're at the 13th percentile, which means we're kind of on the bottom. And instead of saying we want to be the top scorer, we're going to aim for the 80th percentile, which is something else. This allows you a lot more control. It's less loosey-goosey around how you set your targets and what those targets mean. So I wish we had time to have more of a discussion, but I don't know if there's any aha moments or anything else that you'd like to share with us about, what next steps you might take, or, some additional further questions that kind of occurred to you based on today's training.
So I do see Caitlin shared some thoughts in the chat about the last slide, and then Angie has a question about using DSHS aggregate data to compare to, for the larger data set, which yes, you can.
100%. And I really like that, that solution to be able to compare with your partners in the state. It's a really great idea. And Caitlin, I'm sorry that I hadn't seen your input before, because that's exactly right in terms of looking at the advice that you would give. You would want folks to review and implement measure results more fluidly in their grant activities across the board. And again, this is an area where the innovation and advancement that we've had in Ryan White can lend itself to other programs. Stop making your HIV program just a little standalone silo. Your HIV program is an integrated part of your service delivery model that you're providing to the community at large. So act like it. All right, I unshared when I should have said there's one more slide that's really important here before we round the corner into our evaluation. And that is, we have one session remaining, session 8, which will be on advising on provider quality improvement projects. Now, this is the only one this series that we have a homework for you. So the homework will be, we want you as AAs to bring information on past QI projects conducted in your region. We want to hear about current QI projects that are being conducted in your region. And we want show and tell of the forms and formats that you use to lead QI projects in your region. So do you have a report form that you use? Do you have a PDSA tracker? Do you have a format that you use to kind of combine everybody's information into an at-a-glance place to make your life easier and less crazy? We want to know. We want to know if you don't have these resources too, and how it's felt try to hobble along, and where we might be able to provide additional suggested formats and guidance to you. We have all these ideas, but we don't want to overburden you with realms of possibility that aren't going to be relevant for where you're at. So we do want and need you to be able to come to this next session in November with some of this material. And we will be emphasizing show and tell much more heavily in that session. All right. So before we go, I am just going to throw up our evaluation poll. And I know that I talked really quickly and didn't really have much of a chance for people to share other ahas or other questions or concerns that bubbled out of our content today. So I don't know, does anyone want to share any while we are responding to our evaluation? Did the evaluation go up? It did. My apologies that we didn't get to the breakout session.
If you do have any thoughts after the session, you can email me and I can connect with the health access team and Michael or whoever the subject expert matter might be for that question. But I think Michael and Rhonda and Stacy can help us with just about everything. And if you have something specific to compare with another AA, I'm able to connect you together. We really want to work on cross-part collaboration over the next year so we can see each other's data, right? How can we compare? We don't even have it or share it. We can individually look at areas at the different regions, but as we know, some regions have their own data system, so they only import the only required stuff. So some of it's not there, and that's okay. But we can still collaborate, sharing manually, in other words, right? We don't always have to depend on Aries. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I personally, my aha moment was, and it happens over and over, is the qualitative going that route. So I'm going to think how we could do that at the state with such a big data set, but we do have a program that already does do surveys, but it's always, we don't get the results for like a year and a half. So that's not very helpful. So that's why we ask for your surveys and all that information from you, so we can use it to make decisions and implement different things and blah, blah, blah.
And I'm sure that our partners in Dallas will be happy to share the results of the work that they have ongoing, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Of course.
All right.
Yeah,
everybody.
I was on some of those calls and they did get a little spicy, but all in the end, it came together. So you got to do the process to get to the goals, right?
Yes. Great.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's training, and we'll see you in November. Be on the lookout for my email that'll include the toolkit that'll be coming later this afternoon. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.